Story number one. I thought I was going on a first date, not walking into a war zone. He had a crooked smile, a beat-up Chevy, and unknowingly drove me into the scariest night of my life. We sat by the window, unaware that it would soon explode into shards and screams. You never expect to beg for your life on a night meant for flirting and flan. I still remember how the air smelled like pork and espresso before it reeked of smoke and fear. It was the summer of '83, and Miami was a painting of neon and sweat, the kind of place where life buzzed loud and fast, and even a quiet evening felt like a celebration. That night, I was wearing a sky blue dress that clung to my waist just right, nervous hands fidgeting with a silver bracelet my abuela had gifted me. I'd agreed to go on a date with Rodrigo, Rody, a soft-spoken guy I'd met at a party, who loved vinyl records more than people. His name was Rody, short for Rodrigo, and he seemed really nice. He had a cute smile, he was kind of shy, and he worked at a record store downtown. He picked me up in a rattling Chevy that smelled faintly of engine oil and cheap cologne. We barely talked during the drive, just floated in silence while the city moved around us. Miami didn't need our words anyway, it spoke loud enough for both of us. We were heading to a little Cuban spot tucked between a pawn shop and a bakery in Little Havana. I'd never been there before, but everyone raved about it. The restaurant was alive, old photos on the walls, the rhythmic clatter of plates, laughter in Spanish, and aromas that felt like home. We were seated by the window, a spot that felt lucky at the time. I told myself I was being silly for worrying about my hair, or whether he'd noticed the scuff on my heels. The smell of roasted pork and fresh coffee hit me, and I started to relax a little. The place was packed. Families were laughing and waiters rushing around, and we got a small table near the window. He talked about an obscure Argentinian jazz record, and I nodded like I understood. I didn't, but I liked the way his eyes lit up when he talked. That's when the night split in two. There was no warning, no rising tension, just a violent shift, a bang, not cinematic, just sudden. And glass rained down like ice shards. My ears didn't process it as danger at first, but my body did. The window next to us shattered. Glass sprayed everywhere and I froze, my heart pounding harder than I'd ever felt before. I dove beneath the table without thinking. The world above me turned into chaos, chairs scraping, plates falling, screams cutting through the music that had once played from a crackly speaker. Rody was beside me, face pale, eyes wide. He reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. I remember how sharp the glass felt against my knees, how the metal table leg dug into my back. All I could do was repeat a silent prayer in my head, over and over. Please let this end. Please don't let me die here. Not like this. It felt like an eternity. The gunfire, because that's what it had to be, wasn't methodical or clean. It was messy, human. The kind of violence that felt personal, even when you weren't the target. When it stopped, silence hit us like a second explosion. There was this terrible silence at first, one that was eventually broken by people crying or shouting in Spanish. We didn't move, not right away. I was too scared, too unsure if it was really over or if the shooter was waiting for someone to move. Somewhere, a woman sobbed, someone else called out for help. The restaurant, just minutes ago filled with flavor and life, now reeked of gunpowder and fear. Eventually, a voice shouted that it was safe. A waiter. Maybe. I peeked out. Tables flipped like barricades, blood on the floor, but not enough to suggest death. Just pain. Lots of it. People were huddled together, some crying, others checking on each other. I saw an older woman holding a napkin to her arm with blood seeping through and staining the white fabric. I stood, legs wobbling like a newborn deer. Rody helped me up. For a second, we just stared at the mess around us. I remember the sound of my heartbeat more than anything else. That. And the weird detail that my dress had torn, a small rip near the hem, and how that meaningless damage somehow broke me. I started to cry, not because of the danger, but because the night had been stolen from me, from us. Police flooded the area. We were told to sit, to stay still, to give statements. I couldn't even remember what I said. Just fragments of memory poured out. They told us it was a Cuban dissident, Someone angry about politics who shot up the place to make a point. A point, that's all our lives were. Collateral damage in someone's message. I was angry, furious. I had nothing to do with politics, and neither did the crying children or the elderly couple with blood on their knuckles. Rhodey drove me home. We didn't talk. The radio stayed off. The city felt altered, like it had shown me its shadow side. When we arrived at my building, I didn't get out right away. I just stared at my hands and tried to will the tremors away. He asked me if I was okay, and I said yeah, even though I clearly wasn't. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise outside made me jolt. My mind played the memory on loop. The way the glass exploded, the screaming, the cold tile under my knees, even the memory of the food became tainted. I couldn't think of roast pork without tasting fear. We went out again, a week later. We tried, but something had shifted. That kind of trauma carves a gap between people, even ones who could have been something. We were bonded, sure, but not in the way you want to be. I never went back to that restaurant, even when it reopened with fresh paint and new glass. Little Havana was no longer a date spot in my mind. It was a battlefield, a place where the walls had once echoed with terror, not music. Over time, things got better. I went on other dates and laughed and felt normal again, but obviously, that night stuck with me like a scar that you forget about until you catch a glimpse of it. Eventually, I learned to breathe in crowds again. I stopped flinching at loud noises. But that night taught me something I still carry. How thin the line is between routine and ruin. One minute you're flirting over flan, the next you're praying under a table. That's the real horror of life, not ghosts or shadows, but how fragile our peace is and how quickly it shatters. They say trauma fades, but I don't think that's true. It doesn't fade, it settles like dust on a windowsill. You stop noticing it until one day you drag your finger across the surface and realize it's been there all along. Weeks passed, months. I stopped jumping at loud noises, at least in public. I smiled when friends asked me to go out again, said yes to dinner parties, even danced once or twice when the music was loud enough to cover my thoughts. But every now and then, I'd still flinch at the sudden slam of a car door. I'd still scan every restaurant I walked into, checking for the nearest exit. I never told anyone that sometimes. When I was alone, I'd sit on my bathroom floor and count my breaths, just to make sure I was still in control of them. One day, I was walking near Coral Gables when I saw it, a new little cafe, tucked into a quiet corner under some banyan trees, bright yellow awning, iron tables outside, and a chalkboard that said, "We know coffee can't fix everything, but it's a start." I don't know what pulled me in. Maybe it was the scent of cinnamon in the air. Maybe it was the fact that, for once, the street was quiet. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to test myself. I walked in. No one noticed me. The barista was humming a song I didn't know. A woman sat reading a book by the window, her coffee untouched. Everything felt soft, intact, normal. I picked a table near the center. Not by the window, not by the wall, somewhere safe. I ordered a cortadito. Just how my mum used to make it. When it arrived, I wrapped my hands around the cup like it was some kind of anchor. The warmth soaked into my skin. My breath slowed. I didn't cry, I didn't panic. I just sat there in silence and let the moment pass without needing to run from it. That cafe became my little sanctuary. I returned every Sunday, alone. I brought a notebook and scribbled thoughts. Nothing poetic, just real. Fragments, sentences like, "I survived," or "The glass doesn't fall forever," or "Today, I didn't jump when a door closed." I began writing letters I'd never send. One to Rhodey, thanking him for staying under that table with me. One to the waitress who held my elbow as I left the restaurant that night. One to the shooter, not forgiving him, but naming what he took from me. That helped more than I expected. One day, months later, I walked into the cafe and saw a little girl at my usual table. She was coloring with a blue crayon, brows furrowed in serious concentration. Her mother smiled at me from the counter and gestured. Sorry, she got there first. I smiled back, genuinely. I picked the window seat. I sat in the same kind of chair where once I had ducked for cover. And this time, I sat tall. I sipped my coffee and watched the breeze catch the awning, listened to people laugh outside, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the absence of fear, just the presence of something stronger. Healing doesn't happen under tables. It happens when you choose to sit at them again, alone, unafraid, and fully awake to the world that tried to break you. Story number 2. I thought bad dates ended with awkward hugs, not flashing lights and cops yelling at me through shattered windows. You know that feeling when you're too deep in something to back out? That was me, clinging to a car seat while the speedometer screamed. When Jay picked me up, I thought he looked like a wannabe rapper. I didn't realize I was starring in his next car chase. I never imagined a first date would end with my face pressed to cold asphalt and a dozen guns pointed in my direction. One second I was thinking about dinner, and the next, I was living out a police chase scene I never auditioned for. So, I've been a listener for a while and I love your stories, and I think that you might like to read one of mine, which involves my terrible dating life. His name was Jay, and we'd matched on an app. He seemed confident, maybe a bit cocky, but in a charming way. There was something magnetic about the way he messaged me, like he knew who he was and didn't need to prove it. That kind of bravado is usually a red flag, but I was bored, curious, maybe a little reckless. He was a dude from a rough part of town, always posting about his souped-up car and flashy sneakers on social media. Hood rich, I guess you could call it, big attitude, bigger dreams, but probably not much in his bank account. Still, he had a vibe and I was curious. Jay didn't suggest anything fancy, just a drive, maybe something low-key for food, no expectations. That actually sounded like a relief compared to all the overly planned first dates I'd been on lately. I've been looking forward to the date for days. I didn't tell my friends about it. Maybe because I already knew they'd judge me for saying yes to a guy who spelled your as But something in me wanted to roll the dice. I kept my outfit simple, nothing too extra. Cute top, jeans, sneakers, just in case we ended up walking. The moment I stepped outside, I heard him before I saw him. The car was humming like a machine in a Fast and Furious audition. I walked toward it slowly, questioning everything. Jay pulled up outside my flat in this really loud and shiny car. The thing was decked out with tinted windows, had some low suspension, and a very bass, heavy sound system that actually rattled the windows before I even stepped outside. And he leaned out the driver's side window, kind of smiling. And I hopped in. That smile, it was mischievous, like he knew this was going to be more exciting than I expected. And the car smelled like air freshener, and this leather polish. He was wearing a tracksuit, all designer, and a gold chain that looked heavier than it needed to be. I thought he was trying a bit hard, but I guess I didn't mind. He seemed excited to show off. As we drove through the city, it was clear he lived for attention. Music loud enough to feel in your chest, windows down, head bopping like we were in a music video. But I wasn't completely annoyed. In fact, I found myself enjoying it. There was something freeing about being next to someone who gave zero thought to how people perceived him. Jay was chatty, telling me about his car and how he'd saved up for the mods and how he'd been in a few street races. I wasn't actually sure if he was exaggerating, but I just kind of nodded along. I kept thinking, this guy's either bluffing or I'm about to be on the news. Then he asked if I wanted to see what the car could do. I gave a casual shrug, expecting a quick rev of the engine, maybe a burst of acceleration for fun. That was my mistake. We pulled onto a quieter road, and Jay's whole vibe changed. His smile got wider and he started driving faster, way faster. The speedometer climbed and my stomach flipped as the car roared. I gripped the seat, trying to play it cool, but I was clearly nervous. I didn't say anything though. I didn't want to seem boring. The world outside turned blurry. He zipped around other cars like they were cones in a video game. My knuckles were pale against the door handle. I could tell he was getting high off it. The rush, the control, the power. I, on the other hand, was calculating if jumping out at 60 mph would kill me instantly. Then I heard it. Sirens behind us. At first, I thought it was just an ambulance, maybe. But Jay's face got excited. He glanced in the rearview mirror and swore under his breath. I turned around and saw these flashing lights behind us, and my heart sank. Police, 2 cars, maybe 3, right on our tail. I asked what was going on, but Jay didn't answer. He just floored it. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't something he could talk his way out of. The police weren't just following, they were chasing. Aggressively. And the car pushed forward, and I was just pinned in my seat. We were flying now, way over the speed limit, dodging other cars like something out of a movie. My hands were sweaty, and my chest was feeling tight. I wanted to scream at him to stop, but my voice was just stuck like a dream.
He was running. From what? I didn't know, but I knew in that moment that I was collateral, just another body in the car.
The sirens were louder, closer, and I could see the police cars in the side mirror, and their lights were blinding me. Jay was focused, hands gripping the wheel, but I could tell that he was panicking. 2. The city started to blur past. Street lights, buildings, everything just looked like a streak. We hit a long straight road. For a second, it felt like maybe he'd lose them. Then something hit us, hard. The whole car jerked sideways. I heard a loud bang and the car swerved hard. My head slammed against the window and I remember yelling. Jay shouted something, but I couldn't make it out over the noise. I looked back and saw one of the police cars had rammed us. The rear of that BMW was crumpled and the back windshield was cracked. It all spiraled after that. The spin, the screech of tires, the slamming halt. We were done. The car started to skid. The tires were screeching and we spun across the road before coming to a stop. I was shaking. My ears were ringing from the impact. Before I could process what was happening, there was another crash and glass exploded everywhere. The driver's side window was suddenly gone. Shattered by something heavy. Maybe a baton. I have no idea. I just remember screaming, covering my face as those shards started to rain into the car. I opened my eyes and saw shadows moving around us. Red, blue light, flashing like a strobe. It wasn't just police, it was full force. Guns drawn, orders shouted. My window was the next to smash and I felt the air rush in. I looked up and there were police everywhere surrounding us. The cars were angled to block us in, lights flashing so bright that it was hurting my eyes. And I saw guns, actual guns, not just like stun guns, pointed right at me through the broken windows. I raised my hands, slowly, carefully, nothing else moved. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it might explode. I froze, hands up, trying to show that I wasn't a threat. Jay was yelling, but I couldn't focus on what it was saying. The police were shouting, too, telling us to get out with our hands up, and I was terrified. But I managed to open the door and stumble out. The road was cold under my feet, and I realized that I'd lost a shoe somewhere in the chaos. That cold, uneven asphalt pressed against my sock as I stepped out of the wreckage like a ghost. Every movement felt dangerous, like I'd twitch the wrong way and someone would pull a trigger. I kept my eyes low, like a student in trouble at school, but the stakes were life and death. My hands were trembling as I held them above my head and kept my eyes down. Too scared to even look at the officers, they grabbed me, not roughly, but firmly, and pulled me away from the car. I saw them drag Jay out, pinning him to the ground. He was still shouting something about how they had no right, but they weren't listening. I didn't care what they had the right to do. I just wanted to be invisible. I wanted this to be over. I was led to the side of the road where an officer started asking me questions. They wanted to know my name, what I was doing, if I knew why Jay ran, and I told them it was our first date, that I had no idea what was going on. My voice was shaky and I felt tears filling up in my eyes, but I held it together. He looked at me like I was a kid who broke something expensive and didn't know how. I think he wanted to believe me, but part of him didn't. I could see the doubt in his eyes, like, why would any sane person get in that car? The police searched me, checked my bag while I stood there, shivering and humiliated while cars slowed down and their passengers were just staring at us. Their faces were pressed to windows, mouths slightly open, watching me like a side character in someone else's disaster. And the police kept me there for what felt like forever, asking the same questions over and over, and I told them I barely knew Jay, that I'd literally just met him online, but I could tell they didn't fully believe me. I said the words like a script, like repeating them enough times might turn them true in their eyes. They said the car was flagged for something. It was stolen, maybe, or a link to a crime. I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. All I could think about was how I'd ended up here on the side of the road, surrounded by cops with guns, all because I thought a drive with a guy might be fun. It was like I blinked and my life shifted into a new reality. I wasn't just a woman on a date. I was a witness, a suspect, a statistic, I wondered if people driving by thought I was part of it, if I looked like someone dangerous. The embarrassment cut deeper than the fear at that point, and eventually they let me go. They didn't arrest me, thank God. But they took my details and said they might call later. Obviously, Jay wasn't so lucky. He got cuffed and shoved into the back of a police van, and I didn't stick around to see what happened next. He shouted something at me when they pushed him inside. I didn't look back. I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't sure if he was blaming me, apologizing, or just being Jay until the very end. None of it mattered anymore. One of the officers drove me home, and I sat in the back of the car staring out the window. When I got to my place, I locked the door, sank onto the couch, and just sat there trying to process everything. The room was dark and still, the complete opposite of the chaos I'd just lived through. I could still feel the pressure of the seatbelt against my chest, still hear the sirens like they were behind my walls. My phone was blowing up with texts and calls from friends, and they were most probably wondering how the date went, but I honestly couldn't bring myself to answer. What was I going to say? Sorry, just got out of a car chase. I eventually deleted Jay's number, unmatched him on the app, and swore that I'd never go on a date ever again. All I wanted was a fun night out, and instead, I got to experience what it was like to pretty much play Grand Theft Auto in real life. Story number 3. There's something about a man who orders for you without asking that feels like a red flag wrapped in a silk napkin. I always thought monsters wore masks, but some of them wear cufflinks and cologne. When I got in that car, I thought it'd be a 15-minute ride home. Instead, I learned how long fear can stretch in silence. We think danger shows itself loudly, but the real kind, it smiles, pays the bill, and opens your door. That drive through empty fields wasn't just a detour, it was a test, and I barely made it back. I'd been single long enough to forget what butterflies felt like, so when my friend Tasha said she knew someone perfect for me, I laughed. Perfect men didn't exist, not outside books or bitter memories, but I agreed to let her set it up, just for the novelty. A lunch date, neutral territory, public, safe. He was a handsome Greek boy, successful and wealthy and everything that sounded perfect on paper. We met through a mutual friend who said he was a great catch, and when he asked me out to lunch, I thought it could be fun. The restaurant he picked was intimidating. White linens, tall glasses, waiters who moved like silent ghosts. I wore my nicest dress, still feeling like a costume, but I went because I wanted to believe maybe this was the kind of place where nice stories began. He showed up in a sleek car wearing a tailored suit, and he had this confident smile that made me think he was used to getting his way. He didn't look at the menu, just ordered both our meals with a casual dominance I tried not to read into. The food was perfect, the company wasn't. He answered every question like it was a waste of time. Short, efficient, almost rehearsed. When I asked about music, he said he didn't have time for noise. When I asked about pets, he frowned and said, "Why bother with creatures that can't talk?" That should have been the moment I left. But women are taught to be polite. We excuse coldness as composure. We swallow discomfort and call it maturity. Then came the wine. When the waiter brought the wrong one, Alexi's charm dropped like a curtain. His voice was sharp and cold, saying that he shouldn't have to explain himself to someone who couldn't do their job right. He didn't just correct the mistake, he punished it. I wanted to leave, but I sat through the meal like it was a board meeting. He rushed through the meal, checked his watch every few minutes.
By the end of lunch, I knew there was no second date.
My car was in the shop, so I'd taken a cab to the restaurant. When Alexi offered to drive me home, I hesitated. I should have said no. Every instinct in me was murmuring warnings, but I was tired. I didn't want to spend more money on another cab. And he seemed calmer after the meal. I told myself I could manage a 20-minute ride. He opened the car door like a gentleman. I got in like a fool. I gave him my address, expecting a quick trip. He nodded and smiled, starting the engine. We pulled onto the main road, and I tried to relax. I made light conversation, mostly to fill the silence, but 5 minutes in, I noticed something. He missed the exit.
At first, I thought it was a mistake. "I think you needed to turn there," I said gently.
He didn't answer right away, just kept driving. "It's fine," he said finally. "I know a better route, scenic." That word, scenic, like a joke wrapped in a threat. The city gave way to long stretches of road, lined with trees and fields, no houses, no people, just empty. I asked again, more firmly, where we were going. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes.
You know, he said, I really don't appreciate being used.
What? I asked, confused. You ate the lunch, let me pay, then decided you're too good for me. My heart began to pound. He said I'd wasted his time and his gas money, like I tricked him on purpose. I told him I didn't mean to mislead him, that I just didn't feel a connection. That's when his voice dropped into something cold and flat. He looked at me, his eyes were very hard, and he said he could drive me deeper into the middle of nowhere. He said he could do whatever he wanted and no one would find me for days, maybe weeks.
I didn't scream, there was no one to hear.
Instead, I did what every woman's been trained to do in danger. I appeased. I softened my tone. I told him I was sorry if I hurt his feelings. I complimented his driving. I thanked him for lunch. Anything to make myself smaller, less threatening, more agreeable. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to memorize trees, landmarks, anything, but everything looked the same, like a looping nightmare. I thought about my mother, my dog, the last text I sent to Tasha. I wondered if I'd be another missing girl whose story started with, she went on a date and never came home. It felt like hours, though it was probably less before he finally turned the car around. I didn't ask why, I didn't breathe, I just stared ahead as the trees became houses again. He didn't speak. When we reached my street, I reached for the door handle, trembling. Before I could, he grabbed my arm, looked me in the eye, and said that he could have done anything to me out there, and no one would have stopped him. He said I should remember that. Then he let go.
I didn't walk, I ran inside.
I reported it to the police the next day. They listened. He lied, smoothly, like he'd done it before. Said I was overreacting, that I misunderstood, that he just took a longer route to talk. They let him go with a warning. I started locking everything twice. Looking behind me on dark streets, I deleted every dating app. I double-checked the faces of drivers before getting into ride shares.
I never saw Alexei again, but he stayed with me. Not in the form of a nightmare, but as a voice. A low one that creeps up every time I meet someone new.
And says, well, what if this one smiles like he did? Story number 4. If someone had told me that a quiet evening at a dusty pub would unravel the last thread of hope I had left, I would have stayed home, but I didn't. I walked straight into my past, dressed in new clothes and pretending I was healed. You think you can outrun your old life, switch cities, change your hair, meet new people, but sometimes your demons don't need to chase you. They're already there, waiting. He seemed perfect, but so did the others, right before everything fell apart.
That night, I heard the silence louder than ever, not because of the fear, but because of the shame.
This isn't a story about love, it's a story about what love can't fix. My name is Camille. I was 32 when this happened, and by then, I'd convinced myself that healing was linear, that with the right man, the scars would fade. But the truth is, some stains cling to you like shadows, and shadows don't care how many times you start over. I've been on dating apps for a while, swiping through profiles, hoping to find someone different, most of them blurred together, shirtless gym photos, bios that read like warning signs, alpha male. No drama, or ride or die. I used to joke that I was collecting red flags like it was a hobby. I always seemed to end up with the same kind of guys. Though, mean, rough, and if I'm being honest, sometimes violent. There was Danny, who once broke my phone because I didn't answer his call fast enough. Then Marcos, the MMA fighter who thought jealousy was romance. The final straw was Curtis. He didn't hit me, but he made sure I wished I had been hit. At least bruises fade. Shame clings. So when I matched with Tom, I braced myself. But he didn't start with "you up" or comment on my body. He asked about my favorite book. He said I had kind eyes. Nobody had ever said that to me before. We started chatting, and he was kind and funny. Even, I told myself this could be a fresh start. I told him small truths, like I'd had bad relationships. I didn't mention the restraining order, or the panic attacks I got when a door slammed too hard. That wasn't first date material. He listened, asked questions, and seemed to get it, and eventually, we decided to meet up. I suggested a place far from my usual spots, a quiet pub called the Willow Tap. I'd only been there once, years ago. It felt neutral, untainted. Tom showed up right on time, and he looked just like he did in his pictures. Average height, brown hair, very kind eyes. And he smiled when he saw me, and I relaxed a little. We talked for nearly an hour about music, hiking, his job, my obsession with sourdough. It didn't feel like a date. It felt like a warm room after a storm. It felt good, like maybe I'd finally met someone who wasn't completely toxic. But then he excused himself to the restroom. I was sipping my drink, half smiling like a fool, thinking about how maybe, just maybe, this could be the first night of something. I was imagining our second date when he came back. Not upset, just sort of distracted. I asked if everything was okay, but he brushed it off and said it was nothing. I noticed he wasn't meeting my eyes anymore. Maybe I overshared. Maybe he Googled me in the bathroom and found something, I don't know. But I felt it. That subtle shift in atmosphere when warmth leaves a room before you do. We finished our drinks and decided to call it a night. Tom offered to drive me home, which I appreciated. We stepped into the parking lot. It was almost empty, save for a few flickering lights and shadows where the alley curled. I remember pulling my coat tighter. The night had grown teeth. Then I saw them. They looked pretty rough, skinny, twitchy, like they hadn't slept in days. I knew that look. I'd seen it too many times before. 3 guys, maybe 4, standing just beyond the glow of the street lamp. I didn't recognize their faces at first, until one of them stepped forward. Johnny. God, it had been years. He used to run with Curtis, my last serious ex. Johnny was the kind of guy who always had a pocket full of pills and a story that ended in handcuffs. I never liked him. Now, he was standing between me and my car. I grabbed Tom's arm and whispered that we should hurry, and he nodded, and we picked up the pace. But Johnny saw me, and he smiled. "Camille," Johnny said, like he was greeting an old friend. "Ain't this a surprise?" Tom stiffened. I didn't speak. Tom tried to stay calm, saying that we were just leaving, but they weren't having it.
I saw one of them pull out a crowbar, but they weren't letting us go that easily.
It was happening again, that feeling, that helpless panic I thought I'd left behind, only this time, someone else was caught in it. One of them smashed Tom's mirror. Another guy kicked the side of the car. Tom unlocked the car finally, and we jumped in. He peeled out of there fast, tires screaming behind us. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't buckle my seatbelt. He didn't speak for the first few minutes. Neither did I. What could I say? I knew these guys were probably connected to my past, and I hated that Tom had gotten caught up in that. He dropped me off. The silence was loud, awkward.
I told him I didn't know those guys would be there and that I hadn't meant for any of this to happen.
Before I got out of the car, Tom said he'd like to see me again, and I wanted to believe him. I went inside. I waited. 2 days passed. Nothing. I texted him, and he didn't reply. I waited a couple of more days and tried again. Nothing. I checked the app, and he'd done unmatched me. Gone, like he never existed. Part of me wanted to send one more message. "Hey, I'm sorry again. That wasn't who I am now." But what would that fix? I sat on my couch, scrolling through old messages, rereading his compliments like they were clues to a mystery I couldn't solve. I felt embarrassed, ashamed, even if I should have picked a different place or told him more about my past up front. But shame is heavy, and I'd been carrying it for years. The next day I deleted the app. I walked to the corner store, bought ice cream I didn't want, and watched the city hum around me. I wasn't angry at Tom. I wasn't even surprised.
I was just tired.
That night I wrote in my journal, not about Tom, but about Curtis, about the night I left, about the bruises I never reported, about the therapist I stopped seeing when she asked too many questions. I wrote until my hand cramped. Then I lit a candle, and I whispered one truth I hadn't dared speak aloud. Maybe it wasn't love I needed. Maybe I needed forgiveness, not from them, from myself. Story number 5. I wish I could tell you that night was a dream come true, that the stars aligned, the ocean whispered sweet nothings, and I walked away with a love story worth telling. But what I walked away with was bruises, both seen and unseen. They always say, trust your gut. I didn't. I trusted a smile instead, a soft-spoken stranger with kind eyes and the manners of a gentleman. If only I had known that sometimes the worst monsters wear polite disguises. It started with laughter and grilled shrimp under string lights, and ended with a stranger's handprint on my face. And I still hear the ocean when I close my eyes, not because it was beautiful, but because it was the only thing that didn't turn on me that night. I used to believe in magical first dates, you know, the kind where you walk barefoot in the sand and share secrets under the setting sun. That night gave me secrets, all right, just not the kind you ever want to share. Sometimes evil doesn't announce itself. It sits quietly across from you at dinner, tells a charming story, and holds the door open. Until it doesn't. I'd been looking forward to that date like a kid looking forward to Christmas. He had that easy confidence, not cocky, but comfortable, the kind that makes you think. Maybe this one's different. We'd met through a mutual friend, and after a few playful messages, he suggested dinner and a walk by the beach.
I said yes.
My dress was simple, a sundress I'd worn only once before but always felt good in. It wasn't about looking impressive, it was about feeling ready, hopeful, like maybe this time things might start differently. The restaurant he picked was cozy, like something out of a summer postcard. Soft jazz in the background, fried shrimp scent in the air, tiny lights glowing above. He pulled out my chair, complimented my laugh, told me stories about his childhood dog and the treehouse he used to sneak into. I laughed. Genuinely, his voice felt safe. But somewhere between the second course and dessert, I noticed how his stories always centered around people getting hurt. Not in obvious ways, but veiled, hinted, masked behind humor. After dinner, we walked. The sky turned into a slow-burning fire. Orange, lavender, pink. I took off my shoes and let the cool sand kiss my feet. We talked about dreams. He mentioned surfing, and I said I'd always wanted to try. We even joked about taking a trip someday. That's when the mask cracked. He started talking about his family. His father, mostly, how strict he was at first. I nodded, thinking he meant the usual tough love. Then he dropped it, casually, like telling me what he had for breakfast. Sometimes his dad used to hit his mum, he said, as if it was no big deal. I stopped, thought I misheard, but no, he kept going. It didn't seem to hurt their relationship, that's just how things were. My skin went cold. I'd never seen my parents raise a hand to each other. Sure, they argued, but never this. The idea of a man hitting a woman, especially for something like talking back, turned my stomach. No real man would ever hit a woman just for speaking her mind, I said. I wasn't trying to be confrontational, but I couldn't let that slide. He changed, not slowly. Instantly, his face tightened like a rope being pulled too far. His eyes narrowed, his jaw locked. And then he yelled. The beach felt too quiet now. No wind, no waves, just his voice rising, laced with fury. He called me names, accused me of insulting his father, of being naive, judgmental. I tried to calm him down, to backpedal, but something in him had snapped. He grabbed my arm so hard that it hurt. My body froze, my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out.
Then he slapped me.
He gave me a sharp slap across my face that stung and made my eyes water. He grabbed me again and I felt another blow, this time to my shoulder from a closed fist. I stumbled, confused, shocked, his hand, just minutes ago resting gently on the table, now a weapon.
I tried to run, but he was stronger. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would burst. All I could think was, get away. Please, just get away. And then, voices.
Not his, someone else's. Strangers. Out of the darkness came running feet, a woman's voice, sharp, commanding, a man's arms pulling him off me. Suddenly there were footsteps in the sand, and a group of strangers appeared out of nowhere. They were yelling at him to stop pulling him off of me, and I fell to my knees shaking, trying to catch my breath. One woman knelt beside me, whispering reassurance. A man called the police. Another blocked his path as he tried to lunge again.
He ran, coward.
Vanished into the shadows like the monster he was. I sat in the sand, shaking, sobbing. People stood between us like human shields. A jacket was wrapped around my shoulders. Someone offered water. I couldn't speak. When the police arrived, I gave them what little I knew, his name, his number, a few pictures, but there wasn't much to give. We had just met, and I didn't know he was capable of that. The kind woman who stayed with me offered a ride home. I said yes. I couldn't bear being alone, inside her car. I looked down at myself. The dress I'd picked so carefully was now stained with sand and tears. My phone buzzed with notifications, friends checking in, maybe him, but I didn't check. I felt betrayed, not just by him, but by my own judgment. When I got home, I sat in silence, locked the doors, kept the lights off. Every sound outside made me flinch. I stared at the wall for hours. The police called, said they were looking, but I knew in my gut they wouldn't find him. Not in time, maybe not ever. That night changed me. I felt less trusting, more guarded, and I kept thinking about his face and how it went from warm and kind to that just cold and angry look so fast. I carried the bruises for days, but the real wound was deeper, under the skin, in the space where hope used to live. Story number 6. There's a moment in life when fun turns into fear, and you don't realize it until it's almost too late. That night started with laughter, lights, and dancing, but ended with a police station and a sickening truth I'll never forget. They called him Hot Tub Dan. At the time, it sounded silly, quirky, even. Now that nickname makes my skin crawl. If we hadn't left when we did, I might have been another girl whose face ended up in the folder marked evidence. He was charming, the kind of charming that disarms you. His parties were legendary, and his smile was the bait. None of us knew what waited beneath the bubbles of his hot tub, what monsters wore cologne and kept vodka cold. Stephen didn't say much that night, but something in his eyes made me pause. That silence, that quiet insistence to leave, he never explained it until much later. And when he did, I realized he'd saved my life. Sometimes your gut whispers before your brain catches up, and sometimes listening to that whisper makes the difference between being a witness and being a headline. I was 22, just out of college, and working at a little coffee shop downtown. He'd come in a few times, always ordering the same black coffee and flashing his smile that always made my stomach jump. His name was Stephen, and there was something about him, an unspoken stillness behind his eyes, like he'd seen more than he let on. He wasn't flashy, no pickup lines, no dramatics. He'd just look at me, warm but unreadable, like he was choosing his words carefully even before he spoke. And when he finally asked me out, it was over the rim of a coffee cup. No build-up, just a gentle, "Dinner this weekend?" And that Friday night, I spent way too long getting ready. I wasn't nervous, at least that's what I told myself, but the flutter in my chest said otherwise. He picked me up in a car that looked like it was borrowed from someone more responsible. I liked that. Dinner was simple, a nice little Italian place, dim lights, good pasta, and conversation that flowed like we'd known each other forever. We talked about absurd album covers, foreign films that made no sense, and his quiet dream of saving up to backpack through Europe. After dinner, the world outside felt too awake to just go home. Stephen asked if I wanted to check out a club nearby. I didn't hesitate. The club was kinetic, every surface pulsed with light. The music wasn't just heard, it lived in our bones. Stephen wasn't much of a dancer, but I was, and when I moved, I felt like I'd left behind every job rejection, every bad grade, every anxious morning behind that coffee bar. I felt free. The club was packed, the music was loud, and the lights were flashing in a way that kind of makes you feel like you're in a different world. We danced, we drank overpriced cocktails, we laughed at nothing and everything. And that's when he arrived. We came across Dan. He came right up to us on the dance floor. Very charming and very full of cocky confidence. He introduced himself as Dan, but everyone called him Hot Tub Dan. The nickname slid off his tongue like an inside joke. Stephen raised an eyebrow. I just chuckled. Dan was older, mid-30s maybe, but dressed young. Polished leather shoes, open collar, slicked back hair. The kind of guy who never checked his phone because everyone came to him. He leaned in and said he was throwing an after-party. I hesitated. Stephen did more than that. He stood still. But the others around us didn't. 2 girls screamed, "Yes!" And a guy behind me was already calling an Uber. Before I knew it, there were maybe 6 or 7 of us piling into Ubers and heading to this hot tub Dan's house.
And I went with them.
Dan's house wasn't a house, it was a statement. A modern 2-story house with big windows and a perfectly manicured lawn. It looked like something out of a magazine. Inside, it was all glass and marble and leather. The kind of place that made you wonder what someone did for a living, but not enough to ask. There were bottles lined behind a sleek bar, and through the sliding glass doors was a hot tub, already steaming in the cool night air. Someone cranked up the music and people started pouring some drinks. Dan was honestly the perfect host. Too perfect, but I didn't see it yet. I didn't get in the hot tub. Not because I didn't want to, I just got caught up talking to some girl about astrology and bad tattoos. There were people splashing, flirting, drinking. Most of them were around my age, a mix of guys and gals who'd all ended up at Dan's place after the club, Stephen. Though he never relaxed, he stood near the patio door, arms crossed, scanning. He wasn't drinking, he wasn't talking, he was watching. I mistook that for judgment.
And then, around what must have been the early hours of morning, Stephen leaned in and said we should head out. I was annoyed. I wasn't ready for the night to end, but he didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "I'm tired."
The ride home was quiet. I was still riding the high of the night, but Stephen seemed distracted. He didn't say much, just kind of looked out the window. I chalked it up to mismatched energy. I didn't press. He walked me to my door. No kiss, just a hug, and "I'll text you tomorrow." I was too buzzed to read into it.
I slept like a rock, but in the morning, everything shattered.
My phone rang. Unknown number, police. They asked if I'd been at a house party the night before. I said yes. Confused, they wanted me to come to the station to answer some questions. There's a silence your mind enters when fear creeps in. The ride to the station felt endless. My imagination painted horrors I couldn't define, but I wasn't ready for the truth. A girl at the party had been, for lack of better words, intimately assaulted. It happened after Stephen and I left. The words hit like a brick. My body went cold. It was Dan, Hot Tub Dan. The officers told me they'd found a lot of evidence at Dan's house. They didn't go into specifics, but said he'd recorded things, videos, pictures, stuff he kept on his computer.
Predator, not host, not party guy, predator.
And I'd been there, laughing, dancing. I'd almost gotten in that hot tub. Every drink I took, every minute I stayed, it all could have led to that room, that file, that evidence. Stephen came over that afternoon. I told him everything. He went pale. And when I asked why he insisted we leave, he said something I'll never forget. Something about him felt off. He was always hovering around the girls, pushing drinks on them and making them feel uneasy. I didn't want to scare you, so I said I was tired. No drama, no speeches, just instinct, and it saved me. I hugged him and thanked him. I don't know if he realized how much he'd done for me that night, but I made sure he knew now. Dan's real name wasn't Dan, it was Chris. The police found a ton of evidence on his computer, videos he'd taken of girls at his parties, some of them unaware they were even being recorded. He'd been doing this for years. He went to trial. I wasn't called to testify, but I followed every update. He got 10 years. 10 years for a trail of ruined lives. Justice? Maybe. Closure? Not quite. I kept thinking of that girl, hoping she had friends, hoping she didn't blame herself, hoping she healed. Stephen and I grew close, closer than either of us expected. I don't know if it was trauma or fate or just timing, but I trusted him in a way I hadn't trusted anyone in a long time. Looking back, that night was a crossroads, a blur of fun and danger, a mix of naive excitement and a close call I'll never forget. And if there's one thing I took from it, one truth that rings louder than the music we danced to that night, it's this. Sometimes the people who say the least are the ones who save you the most. The days after that phone call passed in a haze. I wasn't hurt, but I didn't feel safe either. I kept locking my door twice, kept checking behind me when walking down the street. My brain knew I was fine. My body didn't agree. Every time I turned on the faucet, I saw the hot tub. Every time I poured a drink, I heard his voice. I couldn't sleep. My dreams weren't violent, they were worse. They were almost fun. A replay of the party, the music, the laughter, until the end twisted, until my dream self said yes when real me had said no. I'd wake up sweating, ashamed for being fooled even in my sleep. I didn't tell many people, what could I say? I almost became a statistic. No one warns you about almost trauma, about being haunted by something that never happened, but nearly did. Stephen checked in every day. At first, it was casual. Just a, hey, doing okay? Then one night, he brought over takeout and a copy of some 90s movie I'd never seen. He sat on the floor, not the couch, like he didn't want to assume anything. That made me want to pull him closer. So I did. Weeks passed. Dan, Chris, was in the news again. The girl from the party had spoken to the media. Her name was Rachel. She looked younger than I remembered. She didn't give details, but she said enough to make my heart crack open. She talked about the room, the way the lights felt dizzying, the way she didn't want another drink, but didn't want to be rude. She said she didn't remember everything, just flashes. Her voice was steady, her hands in the video, was shaking. I messaged her on Instagram. I didn't expect her to reply. I just wrote,
"You don't know me. I was there too. I left before, but I think about you every day. You're braver than I'll ever be."
She replied 3 days later, "I'm glad you got out. For real, that helps me more than you know." We didn't speak again, but I printed the message and taped it inside my journal. Stephen and I didn't talk about Dan, not directly. We danced around it like a minefield. But one night, I asked, "Have you ever had that feeling before that someone was wrong?" He nodded. "Yeah, once. Back in high school, a girl I knew went missing. Her boyfriend was weird, controlling. Everyone thought it was just high school drama. She was found a week later. She'd overdosed. He'd kept her phone, blocked her parents. Cops couldn't prove anything. But I never forgot the way he smiled when people cried at her funeral."
I didn't know what to say. Then he added, "Look, that guy reminded me of Dan."
That was the first time he'd said his name aloud. It made my stomach twist. We sat in silence for a long time. Then Stephen whispered, "I'm glad you left with me." I looked at him. "I'm glad you asked me to." I started seeing a therapist. At first, I felt silly, like I didn't earn the right to be shaken. I wasn't the one hurt, but the therapist looked me dead in the eye and said, "Survivors aren't just the ones who get scarred. They're the ones who look danger in the face and survive the aftermath too." That stayed with me. Stephen never asked what I talked about in therapy, but he always waited outside the building, a coffee in hand, just in case I didn't feel like going home right away. We started dating officially, quietly. No announcement, no social media post, just us. Sunday markets, board games, silence without pressure. I learned that healing isn't a straight line. Some nights I cried over nothing, some mornings I woke up smiling, and some days I hated that it took something awful to meet someone wonderful. But slowly, I stopped seeing Dan's face. When I closed my eyes, I started seeing Stephen's.
And I started seeing me, not the girl who almost got hurt, but the woman who walked away.